to indicate what they would regard as their promised land. The fourth element in this theology is the belief that Jerusalem is the exclusive, undivided, eternal capital of the Jewish people. The fifth element, which is not always held by Christian Zionists, but at least by the majority, I would say, in America today and many in Europe, is the belief that the Jewish temple must be rebuilt. And if you want to unpack that, dialogue with me afterwards. There is, sixthly, a strong antipathy toward the Arabs and to Islam, and there is generally a very pessimistic view of the future, a belief in a literal final battle called Armageddon that will take place in the imminent future. That, in a nutshell, is its theological basis, and I'm not going to unpack that now, but as I said, on my website and other resources, I explain, if you like, the theological roots of this movement. What I want to concentrate on is its political agenda, because as you know, what you believe affects how you behave. Theology has feet. These are the kinds of books that sell in the millions, and I mean that literally, millions, in the United States and in many good European Christian bookshops. So you can see from the titles, from the images, the aggressive, apocalyptic, confrontational view either of the Middle East or of Arabs or Islam in particular. They are literally, as Grace Halsall says, forcing God's hand. Let me move on to the political agenda, and this is where the theology of Christian Zionism is earthed and begins to answer some of the questions I began with. Because Zionists believe that the Jews are God's chosen people, it is incumbent upon Christians to support Israel. And a number of Christian organizations were founded since the 1980s. Christians United for Israel was the most recent. The International Christian Embassy, Christian Friends of Israel, they combined have a membership of at least 40, if not 50 million Christians worldwide. The second element of their political agenda is because they believe that God is bringing the Jewish people back to the land, then they have an obligation to facilitate that, to fund it. And you will find Christian organizations that will go into Russia, they will identify Jewish communities, they will show them idyllic films of life in Israel, they will pay off the debts, help them get the documentation they need to prove their Jewish origins, they will transport them, feed them, clothe them, and rehouse them in the settlements in the occupied territories, in the belief that they are fishing for Jesus, that they are assisting God's people back to the land so Jesus can return. The third element of their theology that is translated into practical application is the belief that because God gave the land to the Jewish people, the settlements are key. The settlements are essential, and therefore you will find Christian organizations such as Christian Friends of Israeli Communities, which will assist churches to adopt settlements. In Holland, South Africa, Sweden, Britain, and North America, you will find churches that have adopted a settlement. And although that may sound weird, if you think about it, a church of 20,000 members adopting a settlement of 100 people, that can mean a significant amount of support, financial, political, and in other ways. The belief that, just as the pioneers conquered the Wild West, so the settlers are reclaiming the land that God gave the Jewish people. The fourth element is the belief that Jerusalem is the capital of Israel. No country in the world recognizes Jerusalem as the capital of Israel except Israel. That's why all the embassies are in Tel Aviv, not in Jerusalem. There is only one thing that is needed that will send every nation in the world back to Jerusalem, and that is to move the US embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Legislation has been passed on at least 3 occasions. The funding has been allocated, the building has been identified, but Congress has passed the legislation, but on 3 successive occasions, US presidents have refused to sign the legislation. But sooner or later it will happen. Senator Bob Dole spent much of his life campaigning to move the American embassy back to Jerusalem. Why? Because he knows, as all American politicians know, if America recognizes Jerusalem, the rest of the world will have to do the same, because we will have to deal with America. The temple. It may surprise you to know that Christian Zionist groups are actively supporting extreme right-wing Jewish communities such as the Temple Mount Faithful, who are committed to destroying the Dome of the Rock and rebuilding the Jewish temple. Gershon Solomon is the founder of the Temple Mount Faithful. He is a guest of honor in many churches in North America. He said recently, "We must have a war. The Messiah will not come by himself. We will bring him by fighting." It's the same mentality as the zealots of the first century. And he's not simply a man of words. On the Jewish feast, fast, recognizing the destruction of the temple, he takes an articulated lorry with the foundation stones to lay on the Temple Mount. And the Israeli Supreme Court has given his organization permission to do it. It is only the Islamic police, the Muslim police, and the Haram al-Sharif who refuse to allow him in, that it hasn't taken place yet. But once a year, he takes his lorry with his stones and attempts to start the rebuilding of the Jewish temple. The future, you might not be surprised by now that the attitude of many Christian Zionists is deeply opposed to the peace process. Why? Because they believe that the Antichrist will seduce Israel into a false peace, and therefore any attempt to compromise land for peace is seen as a mark of the evil one. So, for example, admittedly it was after 9/11, and therefore we must give her some scope for being upset and angry. But Ann Coulter said this. She said, "We don't need a long investigation of the forensic evidence to determine with scientific accuracy the persons or persons who ordered this specific attack. Those responsible include anyone, anywhere, who smiled in response to the annihilation of patriots. We should invade their countries, kill their leaders, and convert them to Christianity. We weren't punctilious about carpet-bombing German cities and killing Hitler's top officers. We carpet-bomb German cities, we kill civilians, that's war, and this is war." She's a New York Times bestseller writer, and I think, I won't say anymore. John Hagee, he was pastor to Senator John McCain. As I said, a very influential, probably one of the most influential Christian leaders in America today. He said this recently: "It is 1938, Iran is Germany, Ahmadinejad is the new Hitler. We must stop Iran's nuclear threat and stand boldly with Israel, the only democracy in the Middle East." The Jerusalem Post said his speech did not lack clarity. I think you get the point. But he went on to say this, and remember this is a Christian minister with a weekly audience of 100 million, 20,000 people sitting in his church every Sunday, and he could have been the most influential pastor in America if Senator John McCain had been elected, and if he hadn't dumped John Hagee for this statement, quote, "The United States must join Israel in a preemptive military strike against